Welcome, nighttime traveler, to Sleepy Bedtime Stories, your haven of stories and tales to help you sleep. This is the place where traditional tales come to life and accompany you on your journey to rest. But first, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I'd love to know if you're joining me from your bed, from a cozy sofa, or perhaps from some corner of the world where you can still feel the spirit of ancient tales. Please leave me a comment. Every message from you is like a fragment of a precious amphora. If you'd like to support this space of peace and relaxation, subscribe and share the channel so that more people can find their refuge here. And now, take a slow, deep breath, because tonight we're going to dive into another thrilling story.
Oceans and Seas. Chapter 1. The Constant Whisper of the Depths. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the silence of the room expand, slowly, as if the walls were receding towards an invisible horizon. Now imagine water. First a drop, then another, then the soft sound of a wave that comes from nowhere and returns to nowhere. The world you know begins to dissolve, and what remains, what has always been there beneath, is the ocean. There is a whisper that never ceases. No matter the hour, no matter the season, no matter whether you sleep or are awake. At this very moment, whilst your body rests and your mind begins to let go, the earth's oceans are in motion. Their waters shift with a patience that has no name in any human language. They move in the same way they have done for billions of years, with a constancy that goes beyond what we can comprehend. And yet, somehow, we feel it. We feel it when we are near the sea. We feel it even when we are not, because we come from there, because something within us remembers. Allow yourself to hear that whisper now. It is deep and soft at the same time. It is ancient. It is the first language this planet spoke. The earth, when it was young, bore no resemblance to the world we know today. It was a violent, fiery place, covered in molten rock, with no recognizable atmosphere, without life, without color except for the red and black of the constantly shifting volcanic matter. Around 4.5 billion years ago, our planet orbited the sun like a glowing ember, and no one could have imagined, looking at that tormented surface, that one day it would be covered in blue water. But the universe keeps its secrets for a long time and reveals them with a slowness that defies any human notion of waiting. For millions of years, comets and asteroids bombarded the Earth's surface. They came from deep space, from frozen regions of the solar system where water exists as ice. And each impact deposited water molecules on the surface of this young world. At the same time, the volcanoes that covered the planet released water vapor from the Earth's interior, exhaling from the depths what had been trapped since the planet's birth. That vapor rose, accumulating in a primitive, dense atmosphere, and little by little, over a period of time that no human mind can comprehend, it began to condense. The first rains fell on Earth approximately 4 billion years ago. They fell on rock. They fell on silence. And they did not stop. That primitive rain lasted for entire eras. Not days, not years, but millions of years of continuous precipitation, filling the deepest basins of the Earth's crust, accumulating in the valleys and depressions of that volcanic landscape, until one day, somewhere on the primitive planet, water met water, and the first sea was born. There was no one to see it. There were no eyes in the world yet. But the ocean was born all the same, as all great things are born in silence, without witnesses, with a determination that needs no one's admiration. Let that image stay with you for a moment. A primeval ocean with no known shores, beneath a sky of orange and red, with no stars visible through the dense atmosphere, with no wind as we understand it today, just water and rock and the slow heat of a planet cooling very gradually. There is nothing threatening about that image. There is something deeply peaceful about it. The earth breathing, the earth allowing itself to be filled. Over time, that primordial ocean spread. The tectonic plates, those enormous pieces of the jigsaw that form the Earth's crust, began to move very slowly, rearranging the continents, opening up new ocean basins, creating the depths. And within those depths, something extraordinary was happening. In the fissures of the seabed, where the heat from the Earth's interior seeps into the water through hydrothermal vents, the first complex molecules began to form. The chemistry of life was being tested in the darkness of the deep sea, in places where no ray of sunlight had ever touched, at temperatures and pressures that would be lethal to any living thing we know today. But life does not distinguish between what is possible and what is not. Life simply happens. Around 3,800,000,000 years ago, in some warm, chemically active corner of that ancient ocean, something appeared that could be called the first living being. It was not visible to the naked eye. It had no recognizable form. It was merely a membrane, a boundary between the inside and the outside, with the ability to reproduce. It was the origin of everything that would come after. It was the origin of fish, of plants, of dinosaurs, of human beings. It was, ultimately, the origin of you who are listening to this now, in the quiet darkness of your room. We are children of the ocean, not just in a poetic sense, but literally. Life emerged from the sea, and for billions of years lived only in the sea. The ocean was the only home life knew for most of this planet's history. And when finally, some 470 million years ago, certain organisms began to venture onto dry land, they did so gradually, tentatively, carrying the ocean with them in a way. Because the blood that flows through our veins has a chemical composition surprisingly similar to that of seawater, as if we had never quite left the depths behind. There is something about this that invites rest, something that suggests that when we lie down, when we close our eyes and surrender to sleep, we are, in a way, returning to that primordial state where movement is slow and gentle, where external pressure is uniform and constant, where time does not exist in the way we know it during the day. The oceans have carried that rhythm since the beginning, and that rhythm is what cradles you now. Think of the surface of the ocean at dawn. Before the sun has risen high enough to warm the water and create the wind, there is a moment of absolute calm when the sea looks like a mirror. Not a perfect mirror, because the water is never completely still. There is always a very gentle movement, an almost imperceptible breathing of the surface. But at that moment in the early morning, with the sky still a very dark blue verging on violet, is greater than, and the first light of dawn beginning to glow on the horizon. The ocean seems to be sleeping. It seems to be doing exactly what you are doing now, letting itself go, letting itself be rocked. Sailors who have spent months on the high seas speak of that moment with a special reverence. They speak of early mornings when the ship barely moved and the water was so dark and so still that it felt as though they were floating in space, with no land visible in any direction, with no reference point, just the ship and the sea and the sky, and between the three, a balance so perfect that time seemed to stand still. Some described that state as the closest thing to peace they had ever experienced in their lives. Others said that in those moments they felt fear, not a sharp fear, but a gentle, contemplative fear, the fear one feels in the face of something far greater than oneself, and yet which poses no threat. It merely reminds one of its own magnitude. because that is what the ocean is. It is magnitude. It is a scale that the human mind accepts but cannot fully comprehend. The oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface. This means that if you could see our planet from space, what you would see predominantly is water. A blue planet, of a blue that changes with depth and light, from the almost transparent turquoise of shallow tropical seas to the deep, dark blue of the open ocean, and finally the absolute black of the abyssal trenches where sunlight never reaches. The Pacific Ocean alone is larger than the entire land surface of the planet combined. If you were to take all the continents and islands in the world and push them into the Pacific, they would all fit without the water completely submerging them. The total volume of water in the oceans is approximately 1,350 million cubic kilometers. It is a number that means nothing to the human mind because we have no experience of scales of that magnitude. But there is a way to get a sense of it. Imagine if you could hear all that water at once. The movement of that infinite amount of water, the currents flowing like rivers within the sea, the tides rising and falling in a gravitational dance with the moon, the waves forming on the open sea and traveling thousands of kilometers before breaking on some shore. All of that together would produce a sound that would be, at the same time, the loudest and the quietest sound in the world. Because when everything moves at the same time, when the whole system works in harmony, the result is not chaos. It is a murmur. It is precisely that whisper we spoke of at the beginning. That whisper that never ceases. Ocean currents are perhaps the most mesmerizing phenomenon of all those that occur in the sea. They are rivers within the sea, but rivers on an unimaginable scale. The Gulf Stream, for example, is greater than that great warm current flowing from the Gulf of Mexico towards the North Atlantic, carries a volume of water equivalent to more than 500 times the flow of the Amazon River. The Gulf Stream is what gives countries such as the United Kingdom or Norway a much milder climate than one might expect given their latitude. Without it, cities such as London would have winters similar to those of Canadian cities at the same latitude, but without that moderating effect of the sea. The ocean regulates the Earth's climate. The ocean is the heart and lungs of the planet's climate system. There is something about the concept of these currents that is deeply reassuring. They are flows that take thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of years to complete a cycle. There is water currently in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean that was on the surface 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Water that was part of the sea surface in the time of the Egyptian pharaohs, which slowly sank into the Arctic depths and has been traveling in the darkness ever since. very slowly, following the deep currents that circulate along the ocean floor like enormous, silent shadows. When that water returns to the surface, if it ever does, the world will have changed in ways we cannot imagine. But the ocean will still be there. That permanence, that continuity, that is what makes the sea so capable of calming the human mind. Close your eyes a little more. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, the way the surface supports you. Imagine that weight spreading slowly, as if you were floating, as if the mattress were water, as if you were in that sea from which we come, gently rocking you, effortlessly, needing to do nothing more than simply be. Cetaceans have been doing exactly that for millions of years. Whales, those giants of the ocean that they are, along with elephants, the most emotionally complex beings in the animal kingdom after primates, spend their lives in that state of constant floating. They have returned to the sea. Their ancestors left it, and then, approximately 50 million years ago, they returned. As if the land had been an experiment and the ocean, the permanent truth. The ancestors of whales were land mammals, creatures that walked the shores of ancient tropical seas, and who, little by little, over millions of years, gradually ventured deeper and deeper into the water, until their hind legs became tails, their front legs transformed into pectoral fins, and their bodies took on the hydrodynamic and perfect shape they have today. Humpback whales sing. It is perhaps the most extraordinary fact about them, although there are many. The males produce songs of such complexity and beauty that they have left generations of scientists and musicians speechless. These songs can last for hours. They can be heard from distances of thousands of kilometers in the cold, clear waters of the ocean. And they change. They evolve from one season to the next. One whale learns another's song and modifies it, and that modification spreads throughout the entire population in a matter of months. In the same way that a musical hit spreads amongst humans, whales have culture. Whales have art. Whales, in the dark silence of the deep ocean, sing songs that we have not yet fully understood. If you could dive right now into any ocean in the world and stay still, absolutely still, at a depth of 20 or 30 meters, in clear, warm waters, and wait in silence, what you would hear would change you forever. The ocean is not silent. The ocean is full of voices. The clicks and whistles of dolphins, which use sound in such sophisticated ways that scientists are still mapping the complexities of their communication. The rhythmic clicking of pistol shrimp, those tiny creatures that produce such powerful clicks with their claws that they can stun their prey, and that, when they act in groups on the coral reefs, create a constant, gentle sound that is very much like rain on a roof. The deep, resonant song of the blue whale, the largest animal to have ever existed on this planet since the dawn of life, larger than any dinosaur, a creature up to 30 meters long and weighing 150 tons that produces sounds so low-pitched they lie below the human hearing threshold. Sounds that travel across the ocean for thousands of kilometers. The blue ocean has its own music, and it is music that humanity has been listening to, without fully realizing it, since the beginning of our existence. The first humans to see the sea did so perhaps 100,000 years ago, on the coasts of what is now South Africa. Archaeological records tell us that those early modern humans lived in caves by the sea, and that they gathered shellfish and seafood with a regularity that speaks of a deep understanding of the ocean's rhythms. They knew when the tides rose and fell. They knew where to find the best beds of mussels and oysters. They knew how to read the sea in the same way that we read a book, with ease, with naturalness, because that reading was the difference between eating and not eating. Those ancestors of ours had no name for the ocean. They had no need to name it. It was part of their world in the same way that the sky and the wind were part of their world, without needing a definition. Simply present, simply real. They slept to the sound of the sea. They grew up with the sound of the sea. They died to the sound of the sea. And that sound was so ingrained in their experience that it must have been, for them, as natural as the beating of their own hearts. Perhaps that is why the sound of the ocean calms us so deeply, because we carry within us, somewhere in our most ancient memory, the recollection of having slept beside it. The coast of what we now call the Cape of Good Hope, at the southern tip of Africa, is one of the places on the planet where that past is felt most intensely. The Blombos Caves, carved into the cliffs overlooking the Indian Ocean, contain the vestiges of that ancient life. Stone tools, perforated shells that served as ornaments, pieces of ochre engraved with patterns that are the oldest known examples of human art, all of which have been dated with scientific precision to periods ranging from 75,000 to 100,000 years ago. Those beings who lived in those caves, who adorned their bodies with seashells, who carved abstract patterns into red stone whilst listening to the waves, were us. Not in a metaphorical sense. They were biologically identical to us. They had the same brain, the same capacity for abstract thought, the same emotional complexity. They simply lived by the sea. Let yourself be carried away by that image. A cave in a cliff overlooking the ocean. The gentle afternoon breeze carrying the scent of salt water. The constant, rhythmic sound of the waves against the rocks below. That sound that never ceases. That whisper that never stops. And inside the cave, by a small fire, a family sleeping. The child first, because children always fall asleep first. Then the adults, one by one, letting go of the day's tension, surrendering to sleep with the sound of the sea as their only music, without thinking of anything, without worrying about anything, simply sleeping whilst the ocean remains out there, constant and immense, fulfilling its role as always. You are now that child. You are now that family. The ocean is still there, even though you cannot see it, even though you are far from any shore. It keeps moving. It keeps singing. It remains what it has always been. And you can rest, because the ocean does not need your watchfulness. The ocean looks after itself. Over the millennia, humans developed an increasingly complex relationship with the sea. The first vessels were hollowed out tree trunks, then reed rafts, then more elaborate canoes. And around 50,000 years ago, in a feat that still amazes us, groups of humans crossed the open sea from Southeast Asia to Australia. That means that 50,000 years ago, long before the great civilizations we know emerged, before Sumer and Egypt and China, before the pyramids and the temples and writing, human beings set out onto the open ocean in primitive vessels and crossed it. They watched the coastline they were leaving behind disappear and pressed on. They saw water in every direction for days and perhaps weeks, and did not stop. No one knows what drove them. No one can reconstruct their motivations, their fears, their courage. But they did it. And they arrived. And Australia was inhabited by humans 50,000 years before any European navigator reached its shores. Those early Australians knew the sea as few peoples in history have. Their descendants, the Aboriginal peoples, preserve songs and stories dating from a time before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower and the geography of that region was completely different. They have memories of the sea rising, They have songs about coastlines that no longer exist because the ocean covered them 10,000 years ago. They are literally the oldest stories that human beings have passed down from generation to generation. The sea is the guardian of memory. The sea is an archive of what we once were. The Polynesian peoples pushed the art of ocean navigation to its most extraordinary limits. Between the years 1000 and 1500 AD, navigators from what we now call Tahiti and the Society Islands ventured eastwards, northwards, and southwards, colonizing all the habitable islands of the Pacific during a period of expansion that is unparalleled in the history of early navigation. They reached Hawaii, 2,500 kilometers away from the nearest inhabited islands. They reached New Zealand, more than 3,000 kilometers to the south. They reached Easter Island, that remote and solitary point in the South Pacific, and they did so without a compass, without a sextant, without maps as we understand them. They did so by reading the sea. Polynesian navigators learned to read the currents and waves with their bodies. They would lie on the floor of their canoes and feel with their backs and sides the subtle movement of the water. The wave patterns formed as they refracted off islands still invisible on the horizon. They gazed at the stars with a precision that implied an extraordinary astronomical knowledge committed to memory. They observed the clouds, because clouds over an island look different from clouds over the open sea. They track the flight of certain birds that only venture a certain distance from land. And with all that, they crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean and reached their destination. That knowledge was sacred. It was passed down from masters to apprentices in teaching rituals that could last for years. It was guarded as the community's most precious asset, because that knowledge was what made life possible on those remote islands. The connection between communities separated by the ocean. Trade. The exchange of genetic material that kept populations healthy. Relief in times of famine. Knowledge of the sea was knowledge of survival. When European navigators reached the Pacific, from the 16th century onwards, they did so in wooden ships that followed coastal routes and used navigational instruments which, despite all their mathematical sophistication, were in a certain sense more limited than the bodily intuition of an experienced Polynesian navigator. Ferdinand Magellan crossed the Pacific in the year 1521 on the first circumnavigation of the globe. It took him more than 3 months to cross it, with his sailors on the brink of starvation and dehydration. And when they finally reached the Philippines, they had lost men and their ship was in a deplorable state. The Pacific had humiliated them, just as it humiliated all those who crossed it without knowing it well. But even in that suffering, even in that struggle against the vastness of the ocean, there is something that speaks of the profound relationship between human beings and the sea. Magellan and his men did not stop. They pressed on, because the ocean, even when it intimidates, also holds promise. It promises the other side. It promises the unknown, which has always been for humankind both a fear and an irresistible magnet. There is a point in the Pacific, some 2,200 kilometers south of the Fiji Islands, which is the most remote place from any land on the entire surface of the planet. Oceanographers call it Point Nemo, in honor of Jules Verne's famous captain. From that point, whichever direction you look, the nearest land horizon is more than 2,600 kilometers away. At that location, the nearest human beings are not on any ship, but aboard the International Space Station, which orbits above that point at certain times. The astronauts, in that case, are closer than any sailor or inhabitant of the mainland. Stop and think about that. A place on Earth so isolated that the nearest human being might be in space. A place where the ocean stretches uninterrupted in every direction, where the waves travel unhindered for thousands of kilometers before encountering the first resistance. In that place, the ocean is utterly itself, pure, immense, without the human presence felt in so many other parts of the sea. Only water and sky and wind and the creatures that live down there, in the darkness. For even at Point Nemo, in that radical solitude, there is life. Oceanic life on the high seas is scarce compared to that of coastal ecosystems, but it exists. Translucent jellyfish that spend their lives adrift, following the currents for decades. Lanternfish that live in the twilight zones of the ocean at depths of 200 to 1,000 meters, where sunlight reaches them only as a faint glow, and which produce their own light through a process called bioluminescence. Open ocean sharks that have patrolled these waters for 400 million years, with virtually no evolutionary changes, because their design is so efficient that evolution has found no reason to improve it. Whales that traverse these waters on their annual migrations, traveling from the warm tropical waters where they breed to the cold polar waters where they feed, repeating that journey year after year with a navigational precision that still amazes us. And further down, much further down, the deep sea zone, what scientists call the abyssal zone and the hadal zone, is one of the planet's last great mysteries. The Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific is the deepest place in Earth's oceans. Its deepest point, known as the Challenger Deep, lies 11,000 meters below the surface. If we were to place Mount Everest at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, there would still be more than 2 kilometers of water above its summit. It is a place of absolute darkness, of crushing pressure, more than 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure we feel on the surface, and of temperatures hovering around 2 degrees Celsius. For a long time, scientists believed that these conditions made life impossible. Total darkness, extreme pressure, the cold, the lack of food. How could anything survive there? But life, as we have already seen, knows no impossibilities. Creatures live in the Mariana Trench. Sea cucumbers that crawl through the mud on the seabed, consuming the organic debris that slowly rains down from the surface, in what oceanographers call marine snowfall. That constant fall of organic particles from the upper layers of the ocean to the seabed, which forms the basis of the abyssal ecosystem. Amphipod crustaceans up to 30 centimeters in length, with an alien-like appearance, that live in colonies at those depths. Ghostly-looking fish, translucent, adapted to a pressure that would cause a conventional submarine to explode. The first human to descend to the deepest point in the oceans did so on 23 January 1960. Jacques Piccard and US Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh descended in the bathyscaphe Trieste to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. The descent lasted almost 5 hours. Throughout that time, there was total darkness except for the submersible's own lights. The external pressure was such that at one point during the descent, one of the Trieste's windows partially cracked with a sound that, as Walsh described it, was like an explosion inside the submersible. The 2 men, at that moment, were at a depth of around 8,000 meters and continued descending. When they reached the bottom, they saw something no one had expected. They saw a flatfish, a soul, resting peacefully in the mud at the deepest point on the planet. Alive, completely indifferent to the presence of that strange metal contraption that had just arrived in its world. Life, once again, where no one expected to find it. Walsh and Piccard remained at the bottom for barely 20 minutes before beginning their ascent. But those 20 minutes changed our understanding of what is possible. They demonstrated that the ocean, even at its most inhospitable point, is alive. That life is not a fragile and exceptional accident in a hostile universe, but something deeply rooted, something that finds a way to exist even in the most extreme conditions. It is no coincidence that many of us sleep better when it rains, The sound of falling water, whether rain against a window pane, the murmur of a stream, or the sound of waves lapping at the shore, lulls us to sleep with an ease that no other sound can match. Scientists have studied this. The human brain processes the sound of water as non-threatening, as something that requires neither a response nor sustained attention. Unlike sudden or irregular sounds that trigger our alert systems, the sound of water is rhythmic and predictable, varied within an overall coherence that the brain can safely let go of. To stop listening to it consciously, to let oneself be carried away by it. There is also a deep evolutionary association. For our ancestors, the sound of running water or the sea signified proximity to a source of fresh water, to resources, to a place where it was possible to set up camp and rest. The sound of water was the sound of safety, and that association, ingrained over millions of years of evolution, remains within us even though we no longer need to find water sources in the darkness of night. The ocean is telling you that you are safe. It has always told you this. It is telling you this now. The Mediterranean Sea is perhaps the ocean that has most profoundly shaped the history of Western civilization. Surrounded by Europe, Africa and Asia, it was for millennia the center of the known world. Its Latin name, Mare Nostrum, our sea, reflects the affectionate arrogance of the Romans, who effectively controlled all its coasts for centuries. But before the Romans, the Mediterranean was plied by the Phoenicians, those extraordinary seafarers and traders from the coasts of present-day Lebanon, who founded colonies from the Levant to Spain, passing through Carthage in present-day Tunisia. The Phoenicians gave the world the alphabet. They brought glass, purple, and cedar. They carried ideas and inventions from one end of the Mediterranean to the other on their cedarwood ships with sails of dyed linen. The Mediterranean has a distinctive light that has fascinated painters, writers, and travelers for centuries. A clean, crisp light that makes colors more saturated, outlines more defined, and the line between the blue of the sea and the blue of the sky so precise at times that it seems impossible. Homer, some 2,800 years ago, described the Mediterranean as the wine-colored sea, oinopa ponton in Greek, and for centuries scholars debated what that meant, whether Homer was describing the color of the sea at sunset when the light tints it with reds and purples, or whether the ancient Greeks perceived colors differently from us. In any case, the image endures. The wine-colored sea. The sea that has the color of something that washes away worries and brings sleep. On summer nights, on the Mediterranean coasts, there is a breeze that comes in from the sea at dusk. The Greeks called it the Etesian breeze. The Italians in Sicily call it the Ponentino. It arrives cool and damp, with the unmistakable scent of iodine and salt, and makes nights that would otherwise be stifling perfectly sleep-inducing. For thousands of years, the people who lived on those coasts have slept with that breeze coming in through open windows, with the distant sound of the waves as background music, with the scent of the sea as an inseparable part of what rest means. That scent, that breeze, that sound, all of that travels through the air to where you are now. Allow yourself to imagine it. An open window in the darkness, a gentle breeze that lightly stirs the curtain, the sound of the sea, far away yet present, a constant murmur that fills everything without being intrusive. The smell of salt and seaweed and something that has no exact name but which you recognize somewhere deep inside. The body relaxing, the muscles loosening, thoughts slowing down, becoming more diffuse, less urgent, sleep drawing near. The deep currents of the Mediterranean are slow and patient. The water enters from the Atlantic through the Strait of Gibraltar, that narrow gorge between Europe and Africa, which is barely 14 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and circulates throughout the Mediterranean basin for decades before flowing out again, saltier and denser, back out into the Atlantic beneath the incoming current. It is a cycle of extraordinary patience, a cycle that has functioned in this way for millions of years, long before any human being sailed those waters, long before the Phoenicians built their first ships. The Strait of Gibraltar, that place where two oceans meet, where two worlds touch, where the Atlantic and the Mediterranean exchange their waters in a movement that never ceases, is also the place where the history of the Western world witnessed some of its most dramatic moments. There, in the year 416 BC, the Athenian fleet returning from the catastrophic expedition to Sicily was scattered by storms. In its waters, in the year 1138, ships from the First Crusade were wrecked. At its western entrance, in the year 1805, Nelson's fleet and Villeneuve's Franco-Spanish fleet clashed at the Battle of Trafalgar, in a naval engagement that would alter the balance of power in Europe for the following century. But the Strait of Gibraltar does not merely hold the memory of battles. It also holds the memory of peaceful voyages, of merchants, of emigrants, of fishermen who for generations crossed those waters with their nets and their dreams and their fears and their hopes. The sea makes no distinction between warships and fishing boats. It cradles them all with the same serene indifference. The ocean holds secrets it has only recently begun to reveal. The seabed is littered with shipwrecks. Thousands of ships that once sailed the surface and now lie at the bottom, covered in coral and seaweed, inhabited by fish that have no memory of what those hulls once were. Underwater archaeologists have explored the remains of Phoenician, Greek, and Roman ships, Spanish galleons laden with American silver, and submarines from the Second World War. Each shipwreck is a story frozen in time, a moment of terror and loss that the sea has preserved for decades, centuries, millennia. The oldest known shipwreck was discovered off the coast of Turkey, at a place called Cape Gelidonia. It dates from around 1200 BC, from the period historians call the Late Bronze Age, and the ship sank laden with ingots of copper and tin that were to be smelted into bronze. Along with the metal, archaeologists found the craftsman's belongings who was traveling on board: his tools, the weights for his scales, and some personal items. A man who lived 3,200 years ago, who worked with metal in the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean, who one day boarded a ship that never reached its destination. We do not know his name. We do not know if he was Phoenician or Cypriot or Canaanite. But his tools lie at the bottom of the sea, perfectly preserved, waiting. The sea preserves what the land destroys. On land, wood rots, metal rusts, fabrics disintegrate. But in the cold, oxygen-free depths of the sea, protected from light and oxygen, certain things last forever. The Antikythera ship, discovered by Greek sponge divers in 1,900 inches, the waters off the Greek island of the same name, dated from the 1st century BC and carried, amongst its cargo of bronze sculptures and luxury items, a bronze gear mechanism of extraordinary technical sophistication. The Antikythera mechanism, as it is now known, was an astronomical calculator capable of predicting the positions of the sun and moon, eclipses, and even the calendar of the Olympic Games. It was an analog computer built in the 1st century BC, 2,000 years before the concept of a computer existed. It lay at the bottom of the sea for 2,000 years. The ocean kept it safe until the world was ready to be amazed. How many things does the ocean hold that we are not yet ready to see? How many stories? How many secrets? How many mechanisms from eras we thought we understood, which the sea has preserved in its dark, cold archive? Scientists estimate that we have directly explored only around 20% of the seabed. The remaining 80% is uncharted territory for direct human observation. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the depths of our own ocean. That's reassuring too, in a special way, that there's so much left to discover, that the world isn't exhausted, that the ocean still holds enough secrets to keep humanity occupied for generations. Let yourself go a little further. Your breathing has slowed down, hasn't it, without anyone asking you to, without any effort, simply following the natural rhythm the body wants when it feels safe. That rhythm is the rhythm of the sea. Inhalation and exhalation. The wave that comes in and the wave that goes out. What comes in and what goes out. What accumulates and what dissolves. The cycle that never breaks. Tides are perhaps the most easily observable oceanic phenomenon for anyone living near a coast. Every day, the sea level rises and falls following the gravitational pull of the moon and, to a lesser extent, the sun. In most places on the planet, there are 2 high tides and 2 low tides every 24 hours and 50 minutes. That extra time being the result of the moon moving in its orbit around the Earth and taking about 50 minutes longer each day to return to the same relative point. Tides are a clock. They have been the clock for sailors, fishermen, and people living by the sea. Throughout human history, the Bay of Fundy on Canada's Atlantic coast has the highest tides on the planet. There, the difference between high tide and low tide can exceed 16 meters, the height of a 5-story building. Twice a day, billions of liters of water flow in and out of the bay in a cycle that has operated in this way ever since the bay took on its current shape, some 10,000 years ago. The bay floor, at low tide, is exposed as a landscape of mud and rocks covered in seaweed, inhabited by waders that arrive in flocks to feed on the organisms trapped in the mud. And then the water returns, slowly at first, then with more and more energy, until it covers everything and the bay becomes a sea once more, and the waders have to retreat to the higher rocks. It is a rhythm with the hypnotic regularity of a metronome. The tide is the world's pendulum. Coral reefs are the most biodiverse ecosystem in the oceans. Although they cover less than 1% of the seabed, they are home to around 25% of all known marine species. They are the cities of the ocean, structures of a complexity and beauty unparalleled in any other ecosystem on the planet. Every reef is a living being, literally, built over thousands of years by millions of tiny animals called coral polyps, which secrete calcium carbonate and build their skeletons upon the skeletons of previous generations, accumulating layer upon layer of living rock into structures that can be thousands of years old. The Great Barrier Reef off the northeast coast of Australia is the largest living organism on the planet. It is so large that it can be seen from space. It is 2,300 kilometers long. It is home to more than 1,500 species of fish, 4,000 species of mollusks, 200 species of seabirds, and more than 30 species of whales and dolphins. It is a world within a world, a universe of colors and shapes that defies description. Imagining a coral reef at night is a unique experience. By day, the reef is vibrant, full of movement and color. Thousands of fish of all sizes and colors moving amongst the corals, chasing one another, feeding, hiding. But at night, the reef changes radically. The diurnal fish retreat to their shelters amongst the corals and enter a state of rest. Some parrotfish wrap themselves in a bubble of mucus that they secrete themselves, a sort of biological sleeping bag that protects them from parasites during the night. Octopuses go out hunting, changing color and texture in fractions of a second to camouflage themselves amongst the rocks and corals. Lobsters and crabs emerge from their hiding places to feed in the darkness. And the corals themselves, which during the day receive sunlight thanks to the algae living inside them, unfurl their polyps at night to capture the plankton rising from the deep layers. The reef at night is a different world. Darker, more mysterious, seemingly quieter, but just as active, just as alive, just like us when we sleep. The body does not stop. The heart keeps beating. The lungs keep breathing. The brain, far from shutting down, becomes active in ways that are not possible during the day. Dreams are the biological equivalent of the reef at night, the activity that occurs when defenses are down, when vigilance ceases, when the inner world can unfold freely. Let your inner world unfold now, without control, without direction, without an agenda, like the reef when the lights go down. Water has physical properties that make it unique among all substances on the planet. It is the only compound that exists naturally in all three states of matter: solid, liquid, and gaseous, within the temperature range found on the Earth's surface. Water has an extraordinarily high surface tension, which allows certain insects and spiders to walk on it, and metal paper clips to float if placed carefully on the surface. Water has an enormous specific heat capacity, which means it can absorb large amounts of heat without its temperature changing significantly, which is why the ocean acts as the planet's thermal regulator. Without the ocean, temperatures on the Earth's surface would vary so drastically that life as we know it would be impossible. Water is also a universal solvent. Virtually everything dissolves in it, at least in small quantities. Seawater contains, dissolved within it, almost all the elements of the periodic table: gold, silver, uranium, lithium, in minute quantities, but present. The ocean is the most complex solution on Earth, a mixture of such chemical complexity that we do not yet fully understand it. The water cycle is the cycle that makes life on land possible. The sun heats the ocean's surface and evaporates the water, which rises into the atmosphere as vapor. The vapor condenses into clouds and falls as rain over the continents. The rain feeds the rivers, which return to the sea, and the cycle repeats. Every drop of water we drink, every drop of rain that falls on a wheat field or a forest, is water that has passed through the ocean. The water flowing through your body right now has been in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. It has been part of the Antarctic glaciers. It has fallen as rain over the Amazon rainforest. It has been drunk by animals that became extinct millions of years ago. Water is the most traveled substance on the planet, and the oldest, and the one that has touched the most lives. The water in your body right now was once part of the ocean. It will be again one day. There is no separation. There never was. The sound of the sea, that sound which is with you now, even if you cannot physically hear it, is the sound of that continuity. The sound of something that has always been and always will be. The sound heard by the first human beings and to be heard by the last. The sound that existed before there were ears to hear it, and that will exist after the last ear has fallen silent. There are scientists who have recorded the sound of the ocean at its different levels and depths. On the surface, the dominant sound is that of the waves, that irregular, gentle rhythm that varies with the state of the sea. A little further down, at about 20 or 30 meters, the sound from the surface becomes a uniform, constant murmur, like the sound of many voices speaking in a large room, without it being possible to distinguish anyone in particular. It is a sound that divers invariably describe as soothing, like a kind of acoustic embrace. At a depth of 100 meters, the sound becomes lower, deeper, slower. At 1,000 meters, in the twilight zone where sunlight barely reaches, the ocean has its own particular silence, punctuated by the biological sounds of the animals that live there. The clicks of squid, the sounds of fish communicating by vibrating their swim bladders, the deep bass of passing whales. In the abyssal depths, the dominant sound is that of deep currents over the seabed sediment. It is a sound so low frequency that it lies below the human hearing threshold, but special instruments have recorded it and converted it to audible frequencies. When you hear that sound, something in your body recognizes it. Something very ancient. Something that was there, in some way, at the very beginning of everything. Bioluminescence in the ocean is one of the most beautiful phenomena found in nature. More than 75% of marine organisms living below a depth of 200 meters are capable of producing their own light. In the absolute darkness of the ocean depths, life glows. Jellyfish that emit pulses of blue and green light as they move. Fish that have light-emitting organs on their bellies to blur their silhouette against the faint light coming from above. Bacteria that cover dead organisms and make them glow on the seabed. The deep ocean, which from the surface appears to be pure darkness, is in fact a constant spectacle of bioluminescence. There are bays in certain parts of the world, in Puerto Rico, in the Maldives, on some parts of the Californian coast, where bioluminescence is so intense that the water glows at night with an electric blue light. Every movement in the water, that of an oar, that of a fish, or a hand dipped into the water, leaves a trail of light. The first Europeans who witnessed this phenomenon described it with amazement and a touch of fear, unable to explain how the water could glow like that. Today we know that they are dinoflagellates, single-celled organisms that produce light when the water around them is disturbed, as a defense mechanism that alerts predators to their predators. A flash of light that says, in the ancient and universal language of biology, that there is something here, that I am not alone, that I am not invisible. No one who has swum in bioluminescent water ever forgets it. The sensation of being surrounded by light whilst the body moves through the darkness. The way each movement creates constellations in the water. The feeling of briefly being part of something that has no name in any language we know. It is one of those experiences that puts things into perspective. That reminds us that the world is far stranger and far more beautiful than we believe most days. The ocean is that reminder. The ocean is that place where the true scale of things becomes evident. Not through violence, not through drama, but simply through its presence, its vastness, its depth, its age, its life. And now, at this moment, as your body settles deeper and deeper into the place where it rests, as your breathing grows slower and deeper, as the day's thoughts dissolve like salt in water, the ocean is still there, doing what it has always done, moving, breathing, keeping its secrets and revealing others, cradling all the beings that depend on it, which is all of us, in ways we do not always understand but always feel. The whisper from the depths never ceases. It is the most constant sound on the planet. It is the sound that was there before you arrived and that will be there afterwards. You don't need to hear it with your ears to feel it. It is in the rhythm of your breath. It is in the beating of your heart. It is in the flow of blood through your veins. That blood with its salty composition reminiscent of the sea from which we come. The water is calling you back, tonight, in the only way it can. Gently, patiently, with that affectionate indifference the ocean has towards the little things that worry too much about little things. The waves are still reaching some shore at this very moment. Perhaps thousands of kilometers from where you are. Perhaps tens of thousands of kilometers is greater than they come from the open sea, where they formed hours or days ago, driven by the wind, traveling silently through the dark water until they find a coast and break. And the sound of that breaking is the final chapter of that journey, and also the beginning of the next cycle, because the water that breaks on the shore returns to the sea in the undertow and rejoins the ocean, and the ocean takes it back without asking where it comes from or where it is going. Everything returns to the sea. Everything rests, finally, in the sea. Let your thoughts be waves. Let them come, let them break gently, and let them recede without clinging to any. without following any out to the open sea, simply observing how they come and how they go, as the ocean has done with all its waves since the beginning of time. You are in the sea now, not like a sailor battling the wind, like the water itself, without resistance, without a course to defend, simply flowing, simply being. The whisper of the depths envelops you. Constant, ancient, yours. Sleep. Oceans and Seas. Chapter 2. Waves that knew how to go slowly. There is a moment just before falling asleep when the body no longer feels heavy, when the boundaries between skin and air become blurred, and one is not quite sure where one ends and the rest of the world begins. It is a fleeting moment, almost impossible to grasp, because the instant you realize it is happening, it has already passed. It is the threshold, the invisible boundary between wakefulness and sleep. And if you could linger on that threshold a little longer, if you could inhabit that transitional space without crossing it just yet, you would discover that it is very much like the ocean. Not the stormy ocean, not the ocean of the great depths, the ocean of slow waves, the ocean of days of absolute calm, when the wind has decided to rest and the surface of the sea moves only by inertia, by the memory of the previous movement, with those long, gentle undulations that sailors call the swell, traveling from far away without breaking, without haste, with no apparent destination. Those waves that know how to move slowly. That is you now. A wave that knows how to move slowly. The formation of a wave is one of nature's most elegant processes. When the wind blows across the surface of the sea, it transfers energy to the water. But that energy does not travel in the way one might imagine. It is not the water itself that moves from one place to another. What travels is the form. The water actually moves in almost perfect circles within the wave, rising and falling, moving forward a little and then back again, tracing that circular path that physicists call a wave orbit, and it does so without actually moving towards the shore. It is the shape that travels. The wave is, at its core, a pattern of energy that propagates through the water in the same way that the human voice propagates through the air, not as an object that moves, but as a movement that is transmitted. There is something deeply reassuring about that idea. The wave is not going anywhere. The wave simply happens. It exists in the present, at that point in the water where the energy is being expressed at that moment, and then it passes, and the water that was there remains in the same place. Only it has settled back into its resting position. The water rests between waves, just as you rest between thoughts. The largest waves ever recorded in the open ocean belong to a particular category, that of so-called massive waves or anticyclonic waves, which form under very specific circumstances when several waves of different periods and lengths coincide at the same point and combine their energies. These waves can exceed 30 meters in height. They are rare and extraordinary events, and for a long time, sailors who claimed to have seen them were not believed, because mathematical models of ocean behavior did not consider them possible. Until on the 1st of January 1995, a wave 25.5 meters high was recorded by instruments on the Draupner oil rig in the North Sea. That recording changed everything. The monster wave ceased to be a sailor's legend and became a scientifically documented phenomenon. But tonight, we're not interested in monster waves. Tonight, we're interested in the others. The waves that travel thousands of kilometers without anyone seeing them. The waves that are born in the heart of the South Pacific during a storm and travel north, west, east, in all directions, losing themselves in the vastness of the ocean, but without fading away. Because energy is not lost, it is merely distributed. Those waves reach remote shores days or weeks after the storm that generated them has passed. They arrive calm and gentle, having already become that swell that barely disturbs the surface, that long, slow movement that rocks the boats anchored in the harbor with the gentleness of a cradle. The coast of the land is, in southwestern France, regularly receives waves that have traveled from the southernmost reaches of the Atlantic, from the vicinity of Antarctica. These waves have traveled more than 12,000 kilometers before reaching that sandy beach stretching between Bordeaux and the Spanish border. It has taken them weeks to complete that journey. They have crossed the Atlantic without stopping, skirting the Azores, passing to the west of Portugal and Spain, and finally reaching the sandy beach that welcomes them, where they transform, at last, into something visible, into something audible, into that sound of breaking waves that is the final voice of a 12,000-kilometer journey. Think about that. The journey a wave has taken before reaching the shore. All that time spent traveling in silence through the darkness of the ocean, unseen, unapplauded, with no one knowing it was there. And then that arrival, that final moment when the wave reaches shallow water, when the seabed slows its lower part whilst the upper part continues forward, when the wave curves forward, when the water that has travelled so long and so far finally breaks into white foam on the sand. There is something like a sigh in that moment, something that feels like the relief of having arrived. Surfers from all over the world know that moment with an intimacy that very few people achieve with the ocean. For an experienced surfer, a wave is not a wall of water. It is a conversation. It is a being with which one must negotiate, which one must read, whose character and temperament one must know. Every wave has its own unique profile, the way it builds, the speed at which it breaks, the exact point where the face of the wave becomes rideable. Two waves arriving at the same spot a minute apart can be completely different from one another. The ocean never repeats itself exactly. Hawaiian surfers are the heirs to a tradition dating back over 1,000 years. Hinalu, riding the waves, was, in pre-European Hawaii, much more than a sport or a pastime. It was a spiritual practice. It was an expression of social status, because the largest boards and the best waves were reserved for chiefs and the nobility. It was a form of communion with the ocean, which, for Hawaiians, was not a dangerous element to be mastered, but a sacred presence with which to live in respect and harmony. The chants, the ceremonial songs recited before entering the sea, asked for protection and good waves. They asked that the ocean welcome the surfer. They asked that the relationship between humans and the water be harmonious. When the first Protestant missionaries arrived in Hawaii in 1820, one of the first things they tried to suppress was surfing. They considered it immoral, lustful, a waste of productive time. For decades, the practice declined dramatically, but it did not disappear, because the waves kept coming, and the Hawaiians kept gazing at them with that love which has no rational explanation, but which needs none either. And in the early 20th century, in the first decade of that century, which would change the world in so many ways, surfing re-emerged on the beaches of Waikiki, in Honolulu. And with it, something else re-emerged, a way of relating to the ocean that is not one of conquest, but of participation. Duke Kahanamoku, Hawaiian by birth and at heart, the man who popularized surfing on the American continent and in Australia, used to say that the ocean teaches you patience, that you cannot force the waves, that you can wait for the right wave, or you can waste your energy trying to ride the wrong ones, that the ocean always knows more than you do, That wisdom has the character of great truths, those that are applicable to everything, even if they come from a particular context. Patience, waiting for the right moment, accepting that not everything is under our control and that this, far from being a defeat, can be the condition for true rest. Tonight there are no wrong waves. Tonight all the waves are perfect because they are all heading in the same direction, towards sleep, towards silence, towards that boundless place where consciousness dissolves into something greater and gentler than itself. Let the next wave carry you. The Mediterranean, that inland sea which for millennia was the center of the known world for Western civilizations, has wave behavior very different from that of the Atlantic or the Pacific. Being an enclosed sea, with a relatively small surface area compared to the great oceans, it does not have enough space for the waves to develop the long run they need to become that calm and regular swell. Mediterranean waves are generally shorter, steeper, and more irregular. They form and break over shorter distances. These are waves that have not traveled as far and whose character carries that closer, more local energy. But there are exceptions. On certain winter days, when the tramontana wind blows down from the Alps and sweeps across the western Mediterranean with that cold, persistent force that can last for days, the waters of the Gulf of Leon, between the southern coast of France and the north of the Balearic Islands, generate waves of a size and power surprising for an inland sea. These are waves that sailors in that region hold in deep respect, because the western Mediterranean in winter, with the tramontana, bears no resemblance to that placid, blue sea depicted in tourist brochures. However, even in such conditions, there is a quality to the Mediterranean that sets it apart from the oceans. A quality on a human scale. In the Atlantic or the Pacific, when the weather turns bad, there is a sense of absolute, impersonal power in the sea. In the Mediterranean, even at its worst, there is something that retains a certain intimacy. Perhaps because its shores are never too far away. Perhaps because millions of years of human history have imbued that sea with a presence that the open oceans do not possess in the same way. The Phoenicians knew that intimacy and made use of it. Their cedarwood ships, with their low profile and flat keel, suited to the relatively calm waters of the Mediterranean, crossed from one shore to the other, following routes established over generations. At night, they navigated by the stars. The lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, built in the 3rd century BC on the island of Pharos, at the mouth of the Nile, was so tall that its light could be seen from 50 kilometers away. For centuries, it was the most important landmark for sailors in the eastern Mediterranean, the point of light in the darkness that said, "Here is land. Here is the harbor. Here you can rest." The word lighthouse comes precisely from that place. Pharos, the island where that extraordinary structure was built, gave its name to all the lighthouses in the world. Every lighthouse that exists on any coast of the planet, from the most modern ones with automated laser systems to the oldest and smallest on the Breton coast, bears in its name the memory of that ancient structure that stood over the Mediterranean and told sailors they had arrived. Lighthouses have a distinctive aesthetic that speaks directly to something in the human psyche. They are essentially solitary. They are built in isolated places, on headlands jutting out into the sea, on small islands, on wind-swept cliffs. Their function is to be visible when everything else is not, to exist when the world seems not to exist. The lighthouse keepers, those people who for centuries lived in those isolated places, keeping the lights burning, led a life that, to many, seemed like voluntary exile, but which the lighthouse keepers themselves often described as the fullest life they had ever known. Solitude without the anguish of solitude. The presence of the sea in all its grandeur without the threat it poses. The work of keeping the light alive as a daily meditation that fills every hour with meaning. Robert Louis Stevenson, the Scottish author who wrote Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, came from a family of lighthouse builders. His grandfather, Robert Stevenson, built some of the most important lighthouses on the Scottish coast, including the legendary Bell Rock Lighthouse, built on a reef in the North Sea between 1807 and 1811, an engineering marvel that still operates today. The young Robert Louis grew up hearing stories of the sea and lighthouses, of storms and shipwrecks, of light in the darkness. When, as an adult, he set off for the South Seas and found his home in Samoa, in the Pacific, he did so by following that deep calling that the sea had planted within him since childhood. There is a story circulating about Stevenson in his final years in Samoa, when he was already very ill and knew he had little time left. It is said that at night he would go out for a walk in the gardens of his home, Vailima, and would stand listening to the sound of the Pacific Ocean coming from the nearby coast. He would stand there, in the warm darkness of the tropical night, listening to the waves, and, according to those who saw him at those moments, his expression was one of utter peace, as if the sea were telling him something he had been waiting his whole life to hear. When he died, in the year 1894, his friends and the islanders buried him on the summit of Mount Vea, from where the ocean could be seen in every direction. And on his grave they inscribed his own words, his greater than those words he had written long ago as an epitaph. Beneath the vast, starry sky lies he who loved ships and the sea. There is no need for more. That peace Stevenson found in the sound of the ocean at night is the same peace you can find now. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to search for it. It is here, in the rhythm of your own breathing, in the weight of your body upon the surface that sustains it. The ocean is not far away. The ocean travels with you in every liter of water your body contains, in every beat of your heart that moves that water, in every breath that mimics the rhythm of the waves. Take a moment to count your breaths, if you wish, not to control them, but to accompany them. The air that enters is the wave that arrives. The brief, gentle moment of fullness at the peak is the instant of the crest. The air that leaves is the wave receding. And the moment of calm between the exhalation and the next inhalation is the sea at rest between two waves. That instant of absolute stillness that exists between movement and movement. That instant that grows longer. The Arctic and Antarctic oceans are the quietest on the planet in terms of human activity, but they are the noisiest in terms of natural activity. Sea ice, when it forms and when it breaks, produces sounds of extraordinary variety and complexity. Water freezing and expanding within the cracks in the ice produces explosions that travel hundreds of kilometers beneath the water. Icebergs breaking away from glaciers, in a process scientists call calving. The birth of ice, generate seismic waves detectable over enormous distances. And beneath the ice, Arctic fish and marine mammals of the pole produce sounds that researchers are still cataloging, in that language of the cold that no one taught anyone, and that all inhabitants of the polar ocean speak naturally. The Antarctic Ocean is the youngest of the planet's 5 major oceans. It formed approximately 30 million years ago, when the Antarctic continent separated completely from Australia and South America and became isolated at the South Pole. At that time, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the most powerful ocean current on the planet, began to flow around the white continent without any land obstacles to stop it. That current carries volumes of water equivalent to more than 100 million times the flow of the Amazon. It is, by far, the most powerful flow of water on Earth. In the Antarctic Ocean, the largest waves on the planet form regularly. The absence of land between 40 and 60 degrees south latitude, the area sailors call the Roaring Forties and the Raging Fifties, allows the waves to travel around the globe uninterrupted. These same waves can circle the globe completely without ever breaking, traveling eternally in that circle of water around the South Pole. They are the only waves on the planet capable of doing so. They are the waves that have traveled the furthest of all the waves in the world. Waves without a destination. Waves that have given up on reaching a destination. There is something meditative about that idea. Waves circling round and round without needing to reach anywhere, with no purpose beyond the movement itself, without urgency, with no shore waiting for them. The large sailing yachts taking part in oceanic sailing races, such as the Vendée Globe, which circumnavigates the globe non-stop and without assistance, spend weeks in those southern waters. The solo skippers of these races, who travel completely alone for months in boats just a few meters long on the most dangerous ocean on the planet, describe the experience of sailing in the Antarctic Ocean using a vocabulary that ranges from terror to something akin to ecstasy. The sheer scale of it all, the ferocity of the storms, and then, between the storms, moments of calm of a breathtaking beauty. A dawn in the Southern Ocean, with the low red sunlight over the dark green water and the long, steady waves, with the occasional albatross gliding effortlessly over the crests. Those moments, they say, are reason enough to have tried it. The albatross is the bird most perfectly adapted to the ocean that exists. With a wingspan that can exceed 3.5 meters in the largest species, the albatross can glide for hours without moving its wings, taking advantage of differences in wind speed at different heights above the sea in a flying technique called dynamic soaring. An albatross can cover more than 1,000 kilometers in a single day. Throughout its adult life, the albatross rarely touches land except to breed, spending the rest of its time over the open ocean, gliding, resting on the water, feeding. In flight, the albatross can even sleep, alternating the two hemispheres of its brain in a similar way to dolphins, always keeping half the brain awake whilst the other sleeps. Sleeping whilst flying over the ocean, the freest sleep there is. Imagine it for a moment. Wings outstretched, effortlessly. The wind like a supporting hand. The dark blue ocean far below, moving in slow, long waves. The sun low on the horizon, staining the water with colors that have no name, and you gliding over it all, with no destination, with no urgency, simply in the air, simply being. That is the dream. That is where you are heading now. The relationship between the sea and dreams has been a subject of reflection for philosophers, poets, and scientists for centuries. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who lived in the 6th century BC in the city of Ephesus, very close to the Aegean Sea, wrote that the wisest soul is like water, that the mutability of water, its ability to take any form, to flow around obstacles, to always find its way downwards, was the quality we should cultivate in ourselves. Heraclitus also wrote about the river, about how no one can bathe twice in the same river because the river is constantly changing. And although he was speaking of a river, the same truth applies to the ocean. The ocean that exists now is not the same ocean that existed a second ago, because every second its molecules have moved. Its temperature has changed slightly. Some creature has been born and another has died. Some wave has broken and another has formed. The ocean is always new. The ocean is always the same. In that paradox lies its eternity. The North Atlantic is perhaps the ocean that has absorbed the most human history. Its cold and often stormy waters were crossed by the Vikings around the year 1000 AD in their wooden longboats with striped sails, sailing from Iceland to Greenland and from Greenland to the coasts of North America, which they called Vinland. Eric the Red, who was exiled from Iceland for murder and sailed westwards, discovering Greenland around the year 985, did so in that northern sea which, in autumn and winter, can be merciless to small ships. His son Leif Erikson continued westwards and reached the shores of what is now Newfoundland around the year 1000, 5 centuries before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. The Vikings had a relationship with the sea that was unlike that of any other people of their time. It is not that they were not afraid of it. They were. Their mythologies were full of terrible sea creatures, of Jormungandr, the world serpent that encircled the entire earth beneath the sea, of the Kraken, that monster of the deep whose image is not so different from that of a giant squid, which does indeed exist and can reach lengths of up to 14 meters. But for the Vikings, fear was not a reason to stay on land. Fear was part of the experience. Fear was part of the equation of courage, and courage was the most precious commodity in their world. Their ships were masterpieces of naval technology for their time. The design of the Drakars, warships with dragon-headed prows, was both elegant and functional. Their flat keel allowed them to navigate shallow waters and run aground on beaches, whilst the shape of the hull gave them the stability required for the open ocean. These were ships capable of both sailing up rivers deep into the interior of a continent and crossing the North Atlantic. They were ships of extraordinary versatility which, for 3 centuries, made the Vikings the dominant seafarers of the waters of northern Europe and the North Atlantic. At the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, in Norway, some of the original hulls of these ships are preserved, unearthed from graves where they were buried alongside their masters. Because for the Vikings, the ship was so much a part of its owner's identity that it accompanied him in death. Looking at those wooden hulls, which are over 1,000 years old, and which the clay of the graves has preserved with surprising integrity, there is something particularly moving about them. That wood was in the ocean. Those planks, curved and joined with extraordinary craftsmanship, cut through the waves of the North Atlantic over 1,000 years ago. They felt the sea. They held the memory of the water within their wood. The sea holds memories. There are substances that the ocean has carried in solution for millions of years. Chemical traces of geological and biological events that scientists can read like a book. The seabed is also an archive. The sediments that accumulate on the ocean floor over millennia record the history of Earth's climate with extraordinary accuracy. By measuring the isotopic composition of the fossils of microscopic organisms that accumulated on the seabed at different times, paleoceanographers can reconstruct the temperature of the ocean and the atmosphere in past eras with surprising accuracy. They can determine what the climate was like 100,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, 10 million years ago. And what these sedimentary records tell us is a story of cyclical changes. Ice ages and interglacial periods alternating in cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. Periods of extreme heat and periods of extreme cold. Mass extinctions and recoveries. The history of Earth's climate, written on the seabed, is the story of a planet that is constantly changing but always finds its balance. That always returns, in one way or another, to conditions compatible with life. The ocean, in that sense, is Earth's most reliable memory. It does not lie. It does not embellish. It simply records, with the patience of sediments, layer upon layer, year upon year, what has happened. And what has happened, according to those records, is that the planet has gone through situations far more extreme than the present ones and has always survived. It has always found a way to remain a living planet. There is, in that, a message of calm that is worth receiving tonight. The things that seem urgent to us, the worries that during the day feel like emergencies, exist on such a small time scale compared to the history of the ocean that the sea would barely register them if it could choose what to register. Not because they are insignificant in themselves, but because there is a larger scale on which everything that seems urgent is revealed as part of a rhythm so slow that from within it is impossible to perceive it in its entirety. But the ocean perceives it. The ocean carries that rhythm in its currents and in its tides and in its sediments. You are part of that rhythm. Tonight, right now, as your body surrenders to rest, you are part of the greatest rhythm that exists. The warm waters of the Indian Ocean have a distinctive character that sailors who know it well describe as a presence. Perhaps it is the intensity of the water's color, that blue which, under certain lighting conditions and at certain depths, turns almost indigo, a blue so deep and rich that it seems to have substance. It seems almost solid. Perhaps it is the temperature of the water, which on the surface can reach 30 degrees Celsius in summer, a temperature almost suitable for swimming, making the transition between air and water almost imperceptible to the body. Perhaps it is the monsoons, those seasonal winds that for thousands of years governed navigation in the Indian Ocean, which blow from the northeast in winter and from the southwest in summer with a regularity that Arab and Indian sailors learnt to harness over 2,000 years ago. Medieval Arab traders crossed the Indian Ocean following the monsoons with as much confidence as if they were following a motorway. They waited for the right wind, loaded their dhows, those teakwood vessels with triangular sails called lateen sails that are perfectly suited to a crosswind, and set sail, knowing that the monsoon would carry them as far as India or East Africa, and that on their return, the monsoon blowing in the opposite direction would bring them back. It was navigation requiring high meteorological precision, based on centuries of accumulated observation passed down from generation to generation. Ibn Battuta, the 14th century Moroccan traveler and geographer, the man who traveled more kilometers than any other traveler before the 19th century, crossed the Indian Ocean several times during his decades of travel. His accounts of the Indian Ocean are extraordinarily vivid. He describes the quality of the light on the water, the smell of the sea at different latitudes, the different kinds of dolphins he saw from the deck of his ships, the sudden storms and the periods of absolute calm when the ships lay motionless on water that looked like oil. Ibn Battuta was an extraordinary observer, and the ocean, for him, was a book he learned to read on every voyage. The swell of the Indian Ocean during the southwest monsoon months can be impressive. The waves travel from the south, from the Antarctic latitudes, and when they reach the coasts of India and Sri Lanka, they arrive already organized into that long, regular swell which is the most manageable. But when the monsoon blows, it combines with the local waves generated by the wind and creates a complex and sometimes dangerous sea state. But in the transitional months between the two monsoons, in April and October approximately, the Indian Ocean can become almost unreal in its calm. The wind dies down, the sea flattens out. The water takes on that mirror-like quality that turns the surface into a mirror of the sky. It is in these conditions that the fishermen of the Kerala coast in southern India take out their traditional fishing canoes with wooden side stabilizers, the katumaram, literally tied wood in Tamil, the origin of the word catamaran that we use today, and venture out to sea in silence, with the oar barely skimming the water, in that state of serene attentiveness that is the state of the good fisherman. Artisanal fishing has a meditative quality that few human activities can match. The waiting on the still water, attention without tension, the body relaxed but the senses alert, the awareness that one cannot force what the sea has to give, that one can only be present and receptive. Fishermen who have been practicing this art for decades develop a relationship with time and with waiting that philosophers would study with envy. They learn that patience is not passivity. They learn that waiting well is an active and demanding way of being in the world. Tonight, the wait is different. Tonight, there is nothing to wait for because you are already arriving. The waves bring you. The currents carry you. The ocean guides you with the same gentleness with which it guides the water towards the lowest shore, towards that place of rest your body has been seeking for hours. Lobsters have something extraordinary that scientists have studied with fascination. Every autumn, in the waters of the Caribbean and the Western Atlantic, spiny lobsters undertake a mass migration towards the deeper, warmer waters of winter. And they do so in single file, not in disorderly groups but in lines of up to 50 individuals. Each lobster with its antennae touching the body of the lobster in front. A column of lobsters advancing in the darkness of the seabed, in perfect single file, for days on end, towards deeper waters. Scientists have discovered that these lobsters are able to detect the Earth's magnetic field and use it to navigate. That they carry within themselves a biological compass. That they know where they are in the ocean with a precision that requires no instruments. How many ways to know where you are? How many ways to find your way? The albatross by the wind and the stars, the Polynesian navigator by the waves and the currents, the lobster by the magnetic field. Every living creature in the ocean has its own navigation system, its own map of the world. And all those maps are different, All those systems are distinct, and yet they all work. They all take their owners where they need to go. Your body knows where it is too. It knows it's in the right place. Right now. Tonight. It knows the right direction is down. Towards sleep. Towards the rest it needs. Is greater than you don't have to find your bearings. You don't have to use any map or compass. You simply have to trust that the body knows, just as the lobster knows, just as the albatross knows, just as the wave knows which shore is waiting for it. The Pacific Ocean, when it is calm, has a quality that many describe as the most perfect silence there is. It is not the absence of sound, but a presence of sound so uniform and so constant that the brain ceases to register it as such. The movement of the water, the gentle lapping of small waves against the hull of the boat, if you are on one, the distant call of a seabird, all of that merges into a soundscape that is like silence in a way that true silence can never be. It is a living silence, a silence that breathes. The Polynesians, on their long ocean voyages, spent weeks in that silence. Weeks on the high seas, far from any land, with no company but water in every direction, the sky above their heads and the other crew members of the canoe. The isolation of those voyages was extreme. There is no way, from the perspective of modern life, to truly imagine what it was like to be in a wooden canoe in the middle of the Pacific 1,000 years ago. No radio, no GPS, no possibility of communicating with anyone outside that small vessel. Without knowing exactly how far they had to go, relying solely on reading the stars and the sea to know if they were heading in the right direction. And yet, they did not describe it as an experience of anguish, but of connection. Connection with the ocean. Connection with the sky. Connection between the crew members who, in those conditions of radical isolation, developed a mutual understanding of a depth that few experiences in ordinary life produce. They depended on one another in an absolute way. And the ocean, its constant and unfathomable presence, put everything into perspective in a way that only the ocean knows how to do. There is a meditative practice in some Buddhist traditions that invites the practitioner to imagine that they are a wave in the ocean that rises from the surface, that reaches its crest, that falls, that merges once more with the water from which it came, that it has no existence separate from the ocean, that the wave is always the ocean being a wave at that moment, that what we call the self is like the wave, a temporary form that the ocean takes on, that seems individual and separate, but never ceases to be water. One need not believe in any particular tradition to sense the truth of that image. The wave is the ocean. The ocean produces waves just as the body produces thoughts. Thoughts arise and dissolve. Waves form and dissolve. And the ocean continues, and the body continues, in that state of fundamental stillness which is more real than any of the forms it momentarily takes on. Your thoughts tonight are waves. Some will still arrive, a stray thought here and there, an image from the day that has just passed. Let them come. Do not follow them out to the open sea. Watch as they break on the shore of your consciousness and recede. And then let the next one come and go too. One wave after another, increasingly spaced out, increasingly gentle, increasingly small, until the sea flattens out completely. The smell of the ocean is one of the most immediately evocative sensory experiences there is. There is no one who has ever been near the sea who does not recognize that smell instantly and unmistakably. It is a compound smell, in reality, of various chemical substances. Methyl iodide produced by seaweed, dimethyl sulfide, that compound which produces that slightly sulfurous and salty aroma so characteristic of coastlines. Salt itself, which has no smell of its own, but alters all other smells so that the overall scent is immediately recognizable. And something else, something that chemists have not yet fully identified. That indefinable component of the smell of the sea, which has no scientific name but which we all know. Studies on memory and smell tell us that the sense of smell has a more direct connection to the limbic system, the part of the brain that processes emotions and memories, than any other sense. A smell can transport us to a memory with a vividness that no other sensation can match. A scent can make us feel emotions whose origin we cannot explain. The scent of the sea, in many people, almost automatically produces a state of relaxation and well-being that needs no rational explanation. If you can, imagine that scent now. You don't need to have experienced it on the same beach or by the same sea. The scent of the ocean is universal, with variations, but universally recognizable. Let that imaginary scent fill the room. Let it drift in on the breeze that doesn't exist, but that you can feel. Let it change something in the air you breathe, making it saltier, more humid, softer. The Caribbean is one of those seas that seems designed for relaxation. Its turquoise, crystal clear waters, which, over the shallow coral reefs, allow you to see the seabed from the surface with a clarity that seems unreal. Its mild temperatures, between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius for most of the year. Its white sandy beaches, which in the sunlight have that almost blinding brightness that forces you to squint. And at night, the breeze that descends from the island's inland mountains and mingles with the sea breeze, creating those currents of cool, humid air that make Caribbean nights perfect for sleep, a perfection few climates in the world can match. Caribbean nights have a distinctive sound. The crickets and cicadas in the island's inland vegetation, the gentle sound of the waves on the beach, which in the Caribbean, where the influence of the tides is less and the sea is usually calm, are almost always small waves, of the kind that gently reach the shore and retreat without a sound. And from time to time, the sound of a night bird, the distant call of an owl, or one of the seabirds that nest on the islands and are active at night. All of this together forms a tapestry of sound that acts as a natural sleep aid of extraordinary effectiveness. The first peoples of the Caribbean, the Tainos and the Arawaks, who inhabited the Greater Antilles when the Europeans arrived, lived in a relationship with the sea that was an absolute part of their daily lives. The sea was their larder, their path, their place of recreation, their frame of reference. Their mythology was deeply imbued with images of the sea. Their canoes, carved from sabre or mahogany, could carry dozens of people and regularly cross the distances between islands. They knew the Caribbean in a way that the Europeans who arrived in the 15th century took generations to come close to understanding. When Columbus arrived in the Bahamas on 12 October 1492, what he saw was a sea of such beauty that he could find no words to describe it adequately. In his logbook, he wrote that the water was so clear that the seabed could be seen, and that the green of the island's vegetation was the greenest he had ever seen. The colors of the Caribbean struck all the Europeans who arrived in those early decades of exploration. They were unprepared for that chromatic intensity, which was so different from the Mediterranean or the North Atlantic they knew. For them, the Caribbean was almost literally another world. And the ocean surrounding that other world, that inner American sea, held its own secrets, its own depths. The Cayman Trough reaches depths of over 7,000 meters in places. Its own currents. The Gulf Stream originates in the Caribbean before flowing into the Atlantic. Its own reef ecosystems, among the richest on the planet. The light that penetrates the Caribbean waters is of a special quality, due to the exceptional clarity of the water, which contains few suspended sediments because its basins are geologically young and the rivers flowing into it are relatively short. Sunlight penetrates to depths of 40 or 50 meters in some areas. Under that filtered light, the world of the reef has a luminosity of its own that no description can do justice to. The colors of the corals and fish, seen at that depth where the light has already been filtered by the water, are different from the colors we would see on the surface. Red disappears first, absorbed by the water, then orange, then yellow. What remains are the blues and greens, and against that backdrop of cool, soft tones, the forms of reef life take on an almost dreamlike quality. Dreamlike of a dream. It is the correct adjective for what the ocean produces in us when we surrender to its influence. Not sleep as a loss of consciousness, but sleep as an opening to another kind of consciousness. The one that sees things the waking eye does not see. The one that hears frequencies the alert ear does not register. The one that feels the movement of the deep currents even when you are not in the water. That is what is happening right now, somewhere in your brain, as these words reach you more and more slowly, with more and more space between them. The brain beginning to shift states. The brain waves that are fast and frequent during the day are becoming longer, slower, more like the swells of the open sea than the waves of the onshore breeze. The rhythm is changing. Waves that know how to move slowly are in no hurry. They have come from far away and know they will arrive. They need not rush, for their destination isn't going anywhere. The shore is always where it was. Rest is always at the end of the journey. And today's journey ends here. At this point where the water grows shallower and the wave that has traveled for so long finally feels the seabed and begins to curve forward with that gentle, inevitable tilt that precedes the break. That moment before the final rest. That moment when the wave already knows it has arrived and simply surrenders. The ocean welcomes you. The ocean has always been waiting for you. And the waves keep coming, one after another, with that patience that is older than anything we know. Slow, gentle, steady, like you're breathing now, like the sleep that is coming.
Release the tension in your forehead. Relax the muscles around your eyes. Let your arms rest completely, heavy and warm at either side of your body. Your breath now flows naturally, like gentle waves lapping at the shore and receding effortlessly. The stories you have heard tonight slowly fade away, becoming distant whispers that you no longer need to follow. If this journey through time has served you well, you can support this space by liking, subscribing, or sharing your thoughts in the comments. That way, more people seeking rest may find refuge here. And if you are still awake, there is another story waiting in silence, ready to guide you deeper into sleep. But for now, let the voices of the past fade gently away. Let the names, dates, and events melt into the mist of the night's oblivion. The story can wait until tomorrow. Close your eyes. Let go of everything. Rest deeply, and may you have sweet dreams.